If this story moved you, imagine how many more voices are still waiting to be heard. On this channel, we bring you real stories of courage, justice, and quiet resilience, especially from those who've been overlooked or silenced. If you believe in standing up for truth, protecting the vulnerable, and celebrating those who fight back with integrity, then this is your space. Don't miss the next powerful story. Click subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share this video with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Together, we're building a community that values truth, justice, and redemption. You've become a relic with a title we can't afford anymore. The words from Dr. Nathan Caldwell's all-staff email burned on my computer screen. My hands trembled as I reread the announcement that had been sent to more than 300 employees across St. Grace Medical Center. After a thorough evaluation of our financial trajectory, I've made the necessary decision to eliminate several administrative positions. This includes the role of Senior Hospital Administrator currently held by Angela Ruiz. While we thank her for 18 years of service, St. Grace needs innovative leadership to meet today's healthcare demands. Andrea is a traditionalist, resistant to progress, and delaying necessary reform. Andrea. He didn't even get my name right. I'd never been Andrea to anyone. The personal tone of the attack was shocking and completely unprofessional. But then again, so was Dr. Caldwell. My name is Angela Ruiz. I'm 52 years old, and until this morning, I was the Senior Hospital Administrator at St. Grace Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. I'd devoted my entire adult life to this hospital. I started as a billing clerk when I was 23, taking night classes and climbing the ranks through dedication and integrity. I had survived budget shortfalls, state audits, leadership shakeups, you name it. But nothing prepared me for this kind of public erasure. There was a gentle knock on my door. It was my assistant, Brianna, her face pale. Angela. I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. I nodded. He can do this. As Chief Medical Director, he has restructuring authority. I had sensed something was coming when he abruptly canceled our last 3 planning meetings. Dr. Caldwell had swept in 6 months ago with buzzwords like optimization and strategic realignment. But he never once asked how our systems actually functioned. His first move? Cut employee shuttle services. His second? Slash overnight nursing coverage in the ICU. What are you going to do? Brianna asked, her voice shaking. I turned and looked at my office, diplomas on the wall, photos of staff appreciation events, and the rows of neatly labeled binders titled policy deviations, staffing exceptions, risk alerts. 18 years of detailed documentation. Some issues had been resolved. Most had been ignored. I'll be okay, I said slowly, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Sometimes being dismissed gives you more freedom than they realize. I started packing up my personal items, deliberately leaving the binders untouched. I had digital backups of everything. When hospital security showed up to escort me out, one final act of humiliation from Caldwell, I was ready. I smiled, handed over my badge, and walked out with my head held high. That night, I made one phone call. It was to Linda Alvarez, a retired board member and one of the few people I still trusted. He did what? Linda's voice spiked with outrage. Angela, that's defamatory. You could sue. Maybe, I said, pouring a glass of wine as I sat in my quiet apartment. But that's not the route I want to take. I explained how Dr. Caldwell had been quietly eroding safety standards, cutting staff-to-patient ratios in oncology and pediatrics, lengthening surgical shifts, and delaying maintenance schedules, all in the name of cost savings. And the worst part? He was clever about it. Every decision framed as temporary, every policy change justified by misinterpreted data or vague industry trends. The board only sees the budget, I added. Not the fallout. You've been tracking all of this, haven't you? Linda asked, though she already knew the answer. Every detail. Every red flag. Since day one. The surgical staff were being pushed beyond reasonable limits, working consecutive shifts without adequate rest. Equipment that should have undergone monthly inspections was now only checked every quarter. He's been smart about it, I told Linda as I leaned back into the couch, the wine warming my hand. Every decision is dressed up as temporary. He pulls language from industry articles, twists statistics to make it seem like we're simply adapting to new norms. But none of it is sustainable. And none of it is safe. Linda didn't need to ask if I had evidence. You've kept track of everything, haven't you? She said knowingly. Every memo, every complaint, every time something nearly went wrong but didn't, because someone went above and beyond, I said quietly. This isn't the first time someone's tried to cut corners. I've seen 3 previous directors attempt the same. And each time, I had the data to stop it. What I didn't tell her was how deeply personal this all felt. 20 years ago, my mother had been admitted to St. Grace Medical Center for what should have been a routine recovery. One night, due to low staffing and a medication delay, she developed complications that extended her stay by nearly a month. That experience had changed my path. It had shaped my entire career. I went into healthcare administration with a mission to be the person who made sure those kinds of preventable errors didn't happen to anyone else. I gave up everything for this hospital, I said, almost to myself. Vacations, a social life, starting a family. I believed in the work. And you made a difference, Linda replied firmly. You still can. What do I want now? I echoed her earlier question, staring at the shadows cast across my living room wall. I could accept the severance and move on. I could take legal action. I could disappear like Caldwell probably hoped I would. Or I could fight. I want to protect the people still inside, I said slowly. The patients. The nurses who are burning out. But I need to be strategic. Not reckless. Exactly, Linda nodded. He's convinced the board he's their savior. But that narrative can flip fast if the right facts surface. I glanced at my laptop, where neatly labeled folders stored years' worth of documentation, some old, some updated just days before my dismissal. These weren't just complaints. They were verified issues, time-stamped data, policy discrepancies. No one could brush them off as emotional backlash from a bitter ex-employee. Give me a few days, I said. I need to line everything up properly. 3 days later, I sat at my kitchen table, every inch of it covered in paper, printed emails, staffing logs, equipment reports, internal complaints. My head ached from sorting through it all, but I was finally seeing the full picture. My phone buzzed. A text from Brianna lit up the screen. You won't believe last night. 2 nurses out sick, no one replaced them. We were barely operating. A guy with chest pain waited 4 hours. Caldwell said it's the new normal and we need to get used to it. I sighed and added the message to a new section in my growing file. This wasn't just isolated feedback. The numbers backed it up. Since Caldwell's arrival, safety incident reports were up 37%. Near misses had jumped 42%. And staff turnover? Nearly doubled. Just as I opened a spreadsheet to update my findings, my doorbell rang. It was Brianna, holding a takeout bag and a determined expression. I brought food. And news, she said, brushing past me into the kitchen. As she unpacked the containers, she continued, They announced your replacement today. You'll love this. He's a finance guy from Atlanta. Never worked a day in hospital ops. Apparently, he's a visionary in cost reduction. I stared at her. Translation. He slashes budgets and calls it progress. It's his old associate from Atlanta, Richard Langford, Brianna continued between bites. No clinical leadership background whatsoever, but they're calling him a pioneer in healthcare financial engineering. I let out a dry laugh. Which means he specializes in gutting budgets with a smile. Exactly, she nodded. And get this, they're launching a new coverage plan next Monday. Nurses will be assigned nearly double the patient load, and support staff hours are being cut in half. Has anyone pushed back? I asked, though I already knew how that would have gone. Deborah from Cardiac Care tried. She voiced her concerns during the department leads meeting. Caldwell told her if she couldn't adapt, She might want to consider other career opportunities. Deborah Chong had led the cardiac unit for 14 years. She was sharp, respected, and relentless when it came to advocating for safe care. If she was being pressured out, things were deteriorating faster than I'd feared. "What's your move?" Brianna asked, eyeing me closely. "You've got that look, the one that means a plan is forming." I paused. Brianna was loyal, but she still worked at St. Grace, and I didn't want to risk her position by pulling her into something too soon. "I'm weighing my options," I said carefully. I could take the data straight to the board, but Caldwell's already painted himself as the hospital's savior. They see a shrinking deficit and assume it's leadership genius. "There's always the Office of Health Compliance," Brianna offered. "You could file an anonymous complaint. Safety issues like these would trigger a site review." I'd considered that. But by the time regulators sent investigators, Caldwell could have sanitized the paperwork or pushed staff into silence. No, this needed to happen faster. "I think this calls for a broader approach," I said slowly. "Yes, I'll document everything for the authorities. But I also need to bring in staff allies, maybe even families who've seen the decline. And if it comes to it, the press." Brianna raised an eyebrow. "So you're going full exposure?" "Not yet," I replied. "But I'm ready if I have to." What I didn't say was how furious I still felt. Not just at being cast aside, but at the complete disregard for safety protocols I had spent nearly 2 decades protecting. This wasn't just about me, it was about the patients, the staff, the mission of healthcare itself. That night, I made a call I'd been considering for days. 1 week after my firing, I sat alone at a quiet cafe near downtown San Antonio, my half-drunk coffee gone cold. Across the table sat Dr. Lisa Ramirez, head of surgical services and someone I had trusted for years. "I shouldn't be here," she said softly, eyes scanning the room. "Caldwell warned us that keeping in contact with you would be interpreted as disloyalty. And yet here you are," I replied. Lisa sighed, brushing her dark curls behind her ear. "Because this isn't right, Angela. He's cutting so deep we're hitting bone, and no one in leadership seems willing to stand up to him." I opened my notebook. "Tell me what's changed since I left." For the next half hour, Lisa walked me through the chaos. Back-to-back shifts for surgical teams, maintenance requests pushed aside, supply rooms depleted to the point that some nurses were purchasing gloves and alcohol wipes out of pocket. But what troubled her most was the new discharge protocol. "It's all about opening up beds as fast as possible," she said bitterly. "We had 3 readmissions last week because patients were sent home too early. One of them was an older woman who didn't get the right post-op instructions. She was back in the ER within 12 hours, worse than before. Emergency room less than half a day later, in worse condition than before." "Is anyone formally recording these kinds of incidents?" I asked quietly. Lisa gave a weary nod. "We're trying. But the new admin team Caldwell's hires, they're either dismissing the reports or conveniently misplacing them. Deborah's been keeping a private log, but she's already under scrutiny for speaking out." I reached into my bag and slid a small flash drive across the table. "I need you to give this to her. It's a set of secure templates, formats for documentation that meet state compliance standards. They're harder to discredit or ignore once they're filled out properly." Lisa tucked the drive into her coat pocket. "Angela, what exactly are you working on?" "I'm building a case for the Department of Public Health," I replied, lowering my voice. "But I need real-time data from inside, something that confirms the patterns I've already compiled." "You know what this could mean," Lisa warned. "Careers could be destroyed, including yours. And mine." I met her gaze, steady and calm. "And what about the people we're supposed to be caring for? How many more have to be harmed before someone steps up?" She looked down at her now cold tea. "You're right. It's just, he's convinced half the board he's some kind of financial genius. Budget miracles usually come at a price," I said. "In this case, that price is patient well-being." Lisa finally nodded. "I'm in. But be careful. Caldwell isn't just connected to the board. His sister is married to one of the state's healthcare commissioners, and he's got ties to people on the licensing board. That revelation made my stomach tighten. If he had influence at the regulatory level, any formal complaint could be stalled or buried. As we stood to leave, Lisa paused and gently touched my arm. "There's something else you should hear. He's been telling people you were fired for financial mismanagement. Said you falsified reports, that you were the reason for the budget strain before he stepped in." The words struck hard. It wasn't enough that I'd been removed from the position I gave everything to. Now my name was being smeared as the scapegoat for problems I'd spent years trying to fix. "Thanks for the warning," I said, trying to steady my breathing. As I walked back to my car, the San Antonio sun beginning to set behind me, a wave of something new settled over me, not just indignation, but fire. Caldwell wasn't just endangering patients. He was erasing my legacy, dismantling every safeguard I had fought to put in place. This wasn't just retaliation. It was sabotage. And I knew exactly who I needed to talk to next. I pulled out my phone and searched for a name I hadn't dialed in years: Eli Navarro, an investigative journalist with the San Antonio Chronicle. He'd once contacted me about a story involving nonprofit hospital finances. I had declined at the time, out of loyalty to the institution. But now, we need to talk. "I have information on dangerous cost-cutting at St. Grace." His reply came in less than 2 minutes. "I've been waiting for this." "When and where?" We met the next afternoon at a quiet public garden outside the medical district. Eli was younger than I remembered, mid-30s maybe, with a notepad already in hand and recording gear tucked under his jacket. "I've heard whispers," he said as we sat down, "but nothing confirmed. Staff turnover, burnout, delays in care. If you've got evidence, I want to see it." "I have more than hearsay," I replied, handing him a thick folder of printed and redacted documentation. "These are 6 months of incident reports, names removed. But you'll see the patterns. And they all lead back to policy changes that started the day Caldwell walked in." Eli flipped through the pages, growing more serious with each one. Eli's expression darkened as he flipped through the documents I handed him, page after page, laying out a disturbing trend. "This isn't just troubling," he muttered. "It's systematic." But Langford could claim these are outliers or part of a larger issue with the industry. "I figured as much," I replied, sliding a second folder across the bench. "That's why I put this together. Regional safety benchmarks from peer hospitals. You'll see that while others maintained stable metrics, St. Grace has declined sharply since he took over." Eli whistled under his breath. "You weren't kidding about having receipts." 20 years of groundwork," I corrected. "I've tracked these indicators through 4 different leadership regimes." The others listened when patient safety was at risk. Langford silenced me. He looked at me carefully. "Why now? Why not just bring this back to the boardroom?" I took a slow breath. Because the trustees brought him in to fix the books. They see reduced expenses and fewer red lines in the budget. What they don't see, or refuse to see, are the consequences of those savings. And he's framed me as disgruntled and obsolete. "So you need public accountability," Eli said. "Exactly. Once the patients and the broader community are aware, they'll demand action. And the board won't be able to hide behind spreadsheets anymore." Eli nodded, placing the folders in his satchel. "You know he's going to retaliate. He'll question your motives. Paint you as vengeful." "He already is," I said flatly. "But at least now, the truth won't stay buried." As he walked away, promising to verify every detail before publication, a flicker of doubt crept in. Was this truly about safeguarding others? Or was it about defending my pride, reclaiming the respect that had been ripped away? Before I could wrestle with the thought too long, Eli turned back and asked, "What's the outcome you're hoping for, Angela?" My answer was immediate. That this hospital returns to valuing safe, ethical care above budget manipulation. Whether I'm involved in that future or not doesn't matter. That evening, as I settled into my apartment, the phone rang. Linda's voice came through with urgency. He's making calls one by one to board members, she said. He's claiming you're gearing up for a lawsuit. That all of this, she paused, is fabricated to strengthen your case. My stomach turned. That's a lie. I haven't contacted an attorney. I believe you. But they don't know that. He's turning them against you before you get a chance to speak. I clenched the phone tighter. I'd underestimated him. Caldwell wasn't just dangerous, he was calculating. There's more, Linda added. He's rushing his cost-cutting agenda, pushing all changes through immediately instead of spacing them out. He's acting like something's about to break. That confirmed my suspicion. He suspected I was mobilizing. Either someone saw me with Eli, or word had leaked from inside the hospital. What do? I asked, suddenly feeling the weight of it all. Stay focused, she said gently. But be ready. This won't be clean. After we hung up, I stared at the evidence sprawled across my wall. I'd wanted to move carefully, to time everything just right. But Langford had changed the rules. He was accelerating the damage, which meant I had to accelerate my response. I sent a message to Eli. How fast can we move forward with the piece? 3 days later, the San Antonio Chronicle ran the headline. St. Grace Medical Center faces mounting questions over safety cuts and patient risk. Rocked St. Grace Medical Center. Eli had moved swiftly, corroborating my findings with input from current staff and comparing the hospital's internal performance metrics with statewide benchmarks. The article didn't name me directly, but it made clear that a former senior administrator, recently terminated, had raised serious red flags about patient care and internal policies. My phone started ringing within minutes. The first call was from Deborah, the longtime cardiac unit lead. Angela, it's chaos over here, she whispered. Langford's called an emergency department head meeting. He's livid, wants names. He keeps asking who leaked information to the press. Has he addressed anything about the care issues? I asked. Not a word, she replied bitterly. He's not concerned about the patients. He's obsessed with controlling the message. He told everyone that whoever spoke to the Chronicle would be let go immediately. The next call was from Dr. Lisa Ramirez. Her tone was calmer. People are relieved, Angela. Someone finally stood up. You've put words to what many of us have been afraid to say. And now the board's holding an emergency session. Then Eli called. You need to turn on Channel 12, he said without preamble. I grabbed the remote and switched on the local news. There was Richard Langford, flanked by executive team members, standing behind a podium with the hospital's emblem behind him. His expression was stony as he addressed the press. The claims published in this morning's San Antonio Chronicle are entirely without merit, he began. St. Grace Medical Center has always prioritized the safety and well-being of our patients. These misleading accusations appear to originate from a former staff member who was dismissed for performance-related reasons and is now seeking revenge. He never mentioned my name, but it was obvious who he meant. He continued, we have secured legal representation and are reviewing options regarding this defamatory report. We take any attempt to damage the reputation of our institution very seriously. I muted the television, my pulse racing. He's trying to discredit you publicly, Eli said. He's on the defensive. But this is just the start. What's coming next? I asked. The state health department reached out after the article posted, he told me. They want access to everything you've compiled. That development came quicker than expected. Oversight agencies are known for moving slowly, but the attention this story had generated had clearly sped things up. I have digital records prepared and ready to submit, I told him. But what about Langford's threats of legal action? Empty bluster, Eli replied confidently. The Chronicle's legal team reviewed every fact, every quote, every source. It's airtight. Still, I wasn't entirely comforted. Langford had influence, resources, and a network I couldn't fully see. And while I documented everything with care, I knew too well how truth could be warped and weaponized. Later that afternoon, a message popped into my inbox. It was from a hospital email and signed, Check oncology readmissions for the past 8 weeks. Repeated discharges before patients were medically ready. Langford approved the new protocol personally, despite formal protests from senior physicians. My heart raced. This wasn't just useful, it was solid. Concrete. The kind of insider detail that could tip the scale in our favor. I forwarded the message to Eli without delay. This, I typed, is what we've been waiting for. I passed the anonymous tip to Eli, who immediately agreed to dig deeper. By sundown, satellite trucks lined the street outside St. Grace. Reporters stood with microphones in hand as cameras rolled live. The city's healthcare workers union had released a statement applauding the Chronicle's exposé and calling for a comprehensive audit of the hospital's operations. Advocacy organizations were issuing formal requests for transparency, demanding that patient safety not be sacrificed in the name of financial efficiency. What began as a quiet archive in my home office, binders and digital files I thought might never see daylight, had now triggered a full-scale public reckoning. As I sat watching the live coverage, I felt a tangle of emotions, part pride, part apprehension. I'd set out to protect people, to expose the risk. But I hadn't expected it to grow this quickly or to become so personal. This wasn't about getting my job back. It was about the direction of an institution I had helped shape. It was about whether people in pain, fear, or crisis would receive the care they deserved. And no matter how aggressively Langford tried to spin the story, I still held the most important weapon: evidence. 1 week after the article's release, the Texas Department of Health formally announced an inquiry into St. Grace. Inspectors arrived unannounced. They combed through patient files, analyzed scheduling rosters, reviewed maintenance logs, and interviewed frontline staff. Langford was nowhere to be seen. Instead, his lieutenants were left scrambling to respond to detailed questions they couldn't answer. I stayed away from the hospital, keeping in close contact with Deborah and Lisa, who sent me regular updates. For the first time in weeks, I felt validated. Not just personally, but professionally. The very system that had dismissed me was now acknowledging the seriousness of my concerns. But I knew better than to assume the battle was won. Langford wasn't the type to back down easily. On the 4th day of the audit, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find Charles Menendez, chair of the hospital's board. He looked uneasy, glancing up and down the street before speaking. "Ms. Ruiz," he said. "May I come in?" I nodded and led him into the living room, where my documentation was still pinned and stacked across the wall and table. He studied it in silence before turning to me. "The preliminary report from the investigators arrived this morning," he said. "It's troubling. Numerous safety breaches. Several areas flagged for potential penalties. And every one of them links back to policies implemented under Mr. Langford's leadership." I said nothing, waiting. "There's more," he added after a pause. "We found disbursements to contractors tied to his brother-in-law. Equipment purchases routed through firms where he appears to hold a financial interest. We're launching a separate review into procurement irregularities." This wasn't something I had expected. My entire focus had been on patient safety. But now it was clear the problems at St. Grace went deeper than I realized. "We've scheduled an emergency board session for tomorrow," Menendez continued. "Langford has been placed on leave, effective immediately." Then he looked me directly in the eye. "We need your help. Would you be willing to attend and advise on the next steps?" Of all the scenarios I'd imagined, this wasn't one. I had never counted on coming back. "Are you asking me to rejoin the hospital's leadership?" I asked cautiously. He nodded solemnly. "We made a grave mistake both in bringing Langford on board and in letting you go. Your understanding of our internal systems is exactly what we need now." Some members of the board acknowledged serious missteps in how Langford's leadership had been handled. Others remained hesitant, suggesting the reports had been overblown or taken out of context. Langford didn't attend the session. Instead, a sharply dressed attorney read from a prepared statement, citing strategic misunderstandings and divergent interpretations of operational reform. When I was finally given the floor, I didn't focus on blame. I presented a plan. We needed to restore manageable patient loads for nurses, resume preventative equipment servicing, and build a transparent structure for internal reporting, one that couldn't be overridden or ignored by leadership. These aren't drastic changes, I told them. They're what worked for years until recent shortcuts disrupted everything. Yes, implementing them will cost money. But so do repeat hospitalizations, treatment delays, and compliance violations. The discussion was long and at times contentious. But by the end of the evening, a consensus emerged. The board unanimously voted to terminate Langford's contract, effective immediately. I was asked to return as Chief Administrative Officer, with expanded oversight of clinical safety procedures and internal compliance. In addition, an external review firm would audit every policy enacted during Langford's tenure. Any protocols deemed unsafe or unethical would be immediately rescinded. As we wrapped up, Eli's latest article went live. State investigation confirms breaches at St. Grace, executive dismissed. It outlined not only the documented failures in patient care, but also the questionable financial relationships uncovered in the procurement review. As I stepped into the night outside the boardroom, I was overcome by a mix of relief, affirmation, and quiet determination. I'd fought to have my voice heard, not to reclaim a title, but to make sure patients and staff were no longer at risk. And though I had regained a position, I knew the road ahead would be about rebuilding more than policies. It would be about restoring trust. Near the elevators, I spotted Deborah. She approached slowly, then smiled. "Good to see you back, Angela." "Thanks," I said. "There's a lot we'll need to fix." She nodded. "But this time, we're starting from the truth." In the following weeks, I oversaw the restructuring of key operations. We returned to sustainable staffing schedules, reinstated regular oversight of medical devices, and introduced a digital whistleblower portal to make safety reporting anonymous and protected. When the final report from the State Health Department arrived, it listed 27 major violations tied directly to decisions made during Langford's leadership. The hospital paid significant penalties, but more importantly, the report offered a corrective path, one we followed closely. Langford, now disgraced and facing possible investigation over procurement misconduct, left Texas. Rumors suggested he'd found work at a consulting firm in another state, far from the damage he'd left behind. As for me, I no longer saw my return as a restoration. It was a recommitment. I had entered hospital administration not for accolades or corner offices, but to ensure patients were treated with dignity and staff were given the support to care for them properly. 1 year after the day I was escorted out of St. Grace, I stood in the main atrium, unveiling our new patient care initiative, created with input from nurses, physicians, and technicians who had once feared speaking up. Looking at the faces around me, many of whom had quietly resisted a broken system, I felt something powerful, not victory, but renewal. The truth had started the fire, but their courage had carried it forward. In the end, the greatest revenge wasn't removal. It was rebuilding.